Hey guys, it's Brandon and Blaine over here with Applied Leadership Partners, and we just wanted to take a couple minutes. Like many of us right now, our hearts are pretty heavy with what we have going on, and our minds have definitely been busy. Frankly, if anybody knows us, our minds are always busy, but they're really busy right now, just around what's going on in our country. And one of the things that Blaine and I talk about all the time is respecting the moment. And we've got a lot going on right now, with COVID, with interracial relations, tensions, all the stuff that's happening right now in our country. And so we just felt that the importance of having difficult conversations. Right now more than ever is probably something worthy of us taking a few minutes and just talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you know Brandon and I at all, we've both shared recently, whether it's been through writing or through video, kind of our personal thoughts on the moment that we're living through right now. But it's occurred to us that like really the critical skill, and the critical piece to all of this is all of our ability, all of our respective and collective ability to lean into and have a difficult conversation, whether that's around health, whether that's around race, whether that's, in the place of business or just in our neighborhoods. There are a lot of difficult conversations that need to be had now and really always. And, for us to share our opinions on things is fine, but what we'd love to be able to do is maybe take a few minutes and to help all of you, if we can, in making just a little bit more comfortable or a little bit more effective when it's time for you to share your voice or have a difficult conversation with, somebody at work or just your neighbor, as we all try to kind of wrestle with and find common ground on a number of critical issues that are going on in our society right now. And so we've sort of accidentally found ourselves in a place where we're becoming like experts on this particular topic, because when we were starting our partnership, when we were starting our business, one of the things we put on the agenda for our time together as we were exploring the possibilities was we wanted to have a couple hours on the schedule to have some difficult conversations with each other, because we knew, first of all, we needed to get some things on the table and clear the air on some things and just put some things out there for us to move into this thing confidently as partners. But we also wanted that to be a central value and a piece of the culture of our partnership and of our business. And it's just the way we want to do business always going forward. So we deliberately made some time for that. And we talked about, some potential pitfalls we saw in us starting this business or our relationship as partners. We talked about maybe some hangups we might have or insecurities we might have of moving this thing forward. For those of you that may not know, Brandon and I met as colleagues, as co-workers at Quest Diagnostics after we'd both gotten out of the Army. And then over at Team RWB, I was the executive director and Brandon was our director of development. So effectively he worked for me, even though we had a pretty egalitarian, flat organization. Like that was the truth of the matter. And then as we kind of came back together, there was this discussion about, how are we going to do this? Are we going to be 50-50 partners? Who's going to be in charge and all of that? And Brandon was really honest with me about his feelings and what he wanted, and I was, honest with him in return. And anyway, long story short, like we are always having difficult conversations and trying to be candid with one another. And as it turned out, once we sort of launched our business, a number of organizations just sort of asked us to come in and help them with this. We tried not to have too canned or too neatly packaged an offering. When we got into the leadership consulting space, we wanted to let the market speak to us a bit, and we wanted to help people where they needed help. And it's become very clear to us that, case by case, time and time again, organizations are saying, we want you to come in and help us have difficult conversations, to lean into discomfort, to be more honest and candid with one another organizationally. And so, we've put together some stuff and have worked with some folks, and it's just something that we think about all the time. Brandon, I don't know if you want to kind of elaborate a little more on that, but that's kind of where it's shaken out.
Typically, Blaine and I think in terms of, gaining clarity, kind of addressing some of the principles of the matter, and then kind of trying to find some frameworks. Like what are a couple things that I can keep in mind so that no matter what situation I'm in, I can be a little bit flexible to deploy these thoughts into them. So this could be a coaching conversation. This could be a performance management conversation. Frankly, this could be a conversation of, where you have to terminate an employee. And this could be a conversation with your neighbor where you're just walking over for the first time and knocking on the door, or somebody, you know, who doesn't look like you and has had a different life experience, and you're just trying to communicate to understand. So with that, we have just 5 thoughts that we want to, you know, kind of throw out there in terms of a framework.
Yeah, and it's important to note here too, as Brandon said, that like most things are solved, you know, in terms of relationships, whether those are work relationships, community relationships, family relationships, friendships. You know, the communication you have with one another, you know, if you want that to be good long term and to be effective, it's sort of solved culturally. It's solved through building trust. It's through having a relationship and doing a number of things to where, you know, we feel like we're in a space where we can have a real conversation. And you know, we encourage everybody, every organization we work with, every individual, that you don't want to try to solve for hard things mechanically. You know, so we don't try to give you sort of step-by-step process to do things, thinking like if you just follow A, B, C, D, then it'll work out great. Like we want to solve as many things as we can culturally over the long run within a relationship, within an organization. However, you know, we can't just offer you kind of broad thoughts and philosophies on what makes things work well and tick, because a lot of people are stressed right now. They're in a situation right now where they've got to go have a hard conversation, or they're struggling to communicate with their spouse or a family member who's of a different political leaning, or their neighbor who's of a different background. And so we do want to provide a bit of a framework and some steps you can take that will at least help you kind of get started and give you some confidence going along. So I hope that's clear. Like we want to talk big picture and we want to talk culturally, but we also understand that sometimes people just need some steps and they need a place to start. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do here. And maybe you'll find it useful. The first one, the kind of first, you know, thought that we're going to talk about of the 5 is that sooner is better. And what we mean by that is very simply, you know, bad news, hard news, difficult conversations don't get easier. They don't get better with time. And so as uncomfortable as it may be, we want to lean into these things sooner than later. We don't want to let things fester. I mean, frankly, we're in a place in our culture, in our society right now, where we probably should have been having some of these hard conversations a long time ago, myself included, and we just haven't. And so now they're harder than they needed to be because we've put them off, or we've just not leaned into discomfort and had them. So sooner is better. The one caveat we like to say there, though, is that you want to let emotions subside to the extent you can, then go. So that's sort of the way we coach people to do this, is like, you don't want to have a reactionary conversation when you're still fired up, when you're still really emotional. So you want to take a step back and let emotions kind of subside so you can think about it clearly and responsibly, but then go. Don't let it fester. Don't go round and round with it. So step 1 is sooner is better. Brandon, I don't know if you want to add some sort of some thoughts to that as well.
Yeah, I would just encourage, you know, what we talk to people about all the time is, you know, whatever it takes for you to be able to kind of bring your system down. If you're in an emotional place, like, take some time to do that. You know, for me, I do a lot of writing. Writing is really important for me. It helps me just kind of get my thoughts down. And then, you know, just like that email that, you know, you shouldn't send when you're hot in the moment, don't. Just walk away, you know, get some bilateral stimulation, take a run, take a walk, talk to a trusted confidant, maybe, if you're having a hard time, without it being gossiping about the person, because that's just going to build and build and build. And it's what you want to do is try to bring things down. The second thing that we talk about all the time, the second step, is prepare. Like, don't prepare to walk into a fight, you know, prepare to walk in for success. Whatever success looks like, you know, at the end of that conversation for you, you know, you want to prepare for that. Another thing you might want to do as you start to prepare is ask yourself, why have I been putting this conversation off for so long? Why don't I want to have this conversation? And maybe even do some introspection and challenge yourself before you walk in, you know, to that moment. In addition to, you know, preparation, you know, especially when we're talking about maybe even performance management or even coaching, is, you know, walk in with some ideas about what you actually want to discuss, and have a bit of a plan for what you want to discuss, as opposed to, you know, just walking in there and saying, you know, like, it's just not working out. I can't do anything with that. Nobody can do anything with that, quite frankly. But what you can do is be prepared by saying, I'm going to actually separate the individual's behaviors from the individual's, like, character, the person. And I want to just talk about behaviors right now. Or even if it's in a dialogue, in these tense times, again, with one of our neighbors, maybe it's just like, I don't have an agenda other than to understand.
The third one here that we always talk about is be candid. The easiest thing to do and the most common thing people do in difficult conversations is they sort of dance around it. They sugarcoat it. And so you say, you think about it, you prepare, you go in there and you say, I'm going to say all this stuff and it's going to go great. And then you get nervous and you get concerned and you just kind of dance around the topic and you're not candid. You're not forthcoming. You're not direct in what you need to say. And one of the things that we kind of coach people to remember is that clear is kind. You are not doing anybody any good by going into a hard conversation and then kind of avoiding the actual hard stuff. Or, instead of telling them the truth about how they're doing at work or telling them the truth about how you feel or about your experience, you're not doing them any service by doing that. You're doing them a great service by just, opening up a little bit, being a little bit vulnerable and being clear in what you have to say. So, they may not love it. They may not agree with it, but it's really, really important that you're clear and direct in what you need to say. And that doesn't mean being an a-hole by any stretch of the imagination. Like, hey, I'm just being me. I'm just really, candid. No, that means coming at it from a place of caring. So again, you've prepared to go in and have an effective conversation. You're approaching this difficult conversation from a place of caring. Like you really want this to go well and to work out for the other person. And so the best thing you can be then is clear, because that's really kind. And if you're holding that back and you're beating around the bush, like that's not helping anybody.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, nobody can meet you where you're asking them to be in terms of understanding or expectations if you don't actually tell them what you're trying to tell them. So, and I will also say, like, you're just adding time, when you think about, sooner is better. If you don't have the conversation now, it's just going to compound and get worse and worse and worse. And by the time you actually do say what you needed to say in the first place, you're probably going to be really upset because you're going to feel like you had, conversation after conversation after conversation.
We've already talked about this.
Yeah, we talked about this. And meanwhile, the other person's like, what? In terms of being candid, I think we also need to be careful. A lot of times what happens in these things is that when you start to talk about one topic, another topic starts to be jumped into the conversation and it becomes a little bit of a distraction. It could be a performance related issue. And then all of a sudden, somebody else, another name maybe is brought into the conversation. And that's where we need to say like, hey, time out. That's not the conversation that we're having right now. I'd like to have a conversation about this. We have a systemic racism problem going on in America right now. And I've had these dialogues where somebody has read something that I've written and come back and said, police brutality is, fill in this and that. And I said, whoa, time out. I actually didn't make a statement about police brutality. I made a statement about systemic, race relations and racism in America. So let's stay on topic with the conversation, please. I will have a dialogue with you about distinctive, matters, but can we be really candid and just say, that's not the conversation we're actually having. That also leads directly into listening. After we've talked about, what it is that we want to say, we need to listen. People might feel attacked. They might feel upset. They might even feel threatened just by the fact that, you hold a different perspective than they do, or you had a different vantage point on a project and maybe you didn't see things, coming through the way that you had hoped that they would come through. We have to be able to listen, to what our teammate, our neighbor has to say. I'm going to ask Blaine to talk about this because I love the way that he talks about listen and then let them talk for distance.
Yeah, I think when we're having a hard conversation, we've got it all built up. It's difficult. We're nervous about it. And then if we do get in there, the courage to just kind of say what we have to say and get it off our chest, it's like, whew, there it is. I said it all. But it doesn't end there. We really, really have to listen. And it can be hard to do because you've thought about this a lot. It's been difficult for you to broach the subject, to have the conversation. And then, you know, you're kind of preparing for the other person to say whatever they're going to say back. And you may not want to hear it. You may not like what you hear, but I really like this thought. And we kind of coach people to let people talk for distance, because the number one thing people really want in these scenarios is to be heard. People just want to be heard. And if you think about what's going on culturally right now in our society, a lot of it goes back to the fact that there are people in our society that do not feel that they've been heard, that their voices have been acknowledged and honored. And the best thing you can do as a leader or as a neighbor in these conversations is, sure, be clear, be kind, be candid, but then listen. Step 4 is to listen, and listen as long as you need to. Just zip your mouth and let them talk until they are done talking. And if you don't like what they're saying, fine. If you don't agree with it, fine. Allow them to be heard. And I promise you one thing: if you listen intently, if you listen earnestly and honestly, even if you disagree with 99% of what they're saying coming back to you, there will be a nugget in there that will help you to understand. Even if you think all of it's defensive and all of it's hyperbole or whatever, if you listen, you will start to see where they're coming from. And there'll be something in there that it'll be a clue, if nothing else, as to what's really going on with them, what they're thinking, where they're hurting, you know, their perspective. And that will then allow you to advance your relationship with that person, to meaningfully contribute to the conversation as it goes forward. And most importantly, to move on to the fifth point, the fifth step, which is agree on where we go from here. This is so often overlooked in difficult conversations, again, because we're so excited just to like have the conversation, and we're uncomfortable in there. We just want to get the hell out of there. You know, maybe we've sat there and we've listened and we've let someone just give it all back to us, and now we're even more uncomfortable and we just want to get out of there. But the issue with that is you've done the hard work to have the conversation now, and you're going to lose a lot of that work. You're going to kind of lose the progress and the traction you've made if you don't take this fifth step of, let's talk about where we're going to go from here. Let's agree on the next steps. So if it's a relatively simple thing like at work, someone's kind of not meeting expectations, let's talk about how I'm going to help you improve. Let's talk about the things you're going to do to try to improve. Let's talk about when we're going to come back together and talk about this. That's relatively straightforward. Not easy, but relatively straightforward. If the conversation didn't go well, or it's around something that's much more nuanced, like race relations, like maybe we didn't get to a lot of common ground. Maybe we found a little bit of common ground. Like, what are we going to do next? Can we agree to be civil? Can we agree to revisit this conversation? Can we agree on a couple finer points? Can we agree that we both want for things to get better? You know, when are we going to come back and talk about this again? What is it going to look like for us as neighbors moving forward? You've got to take that fifth step of talking about, okay, well, what are we agreeing to then? Why did we have this conversation in the first place? And how are we both going to try to contribute? You know, what are we both going to kind of promise to do moving forward? If you don't do that, then you're just going to have the conversation again, and we're going to end up going around and around. So I know they're hard to have, and I know they're exhausting, but if you don't kind of, you know, you don't have to necessarily put it on paper. This isn't an HR discussion we're trying to have, but you do need to have some agreement on what the follow-up is going to be and what the next steps are going to be, so that we can both contribute to this thing as an ongoing solution moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, I think we talk to people a lot about is we have to, as people, start to enter the paradox of life. Life has a lot of nuance. It has a lot of paradox to it. And so oftentimes, you know, we as people, and I catch myself doing this all the time, create these false dichotomies. Well, it's either going to be A or B, but in reality, there's probably C, D, and E, and maybe even a blend of an A, B. You can call it an AB. You know, I mean, there's probably a lot of ways that you can go about, you know, looking at things, whether they just be like strongly held beliefs and perspectives, or whether they just be, you know, the way that you see a certain situation. You know, think about this statement, and, you know, this and, not but, or either or. It's either this or that. Maybe it's actually this and that. So just be really cautious about that. With that, we really appreciate you guys taking the time just to, listen to what we have to say. We hope that it is, helpful for you. We hope that it might even just give you an idea of, maybe if I just even look at things in these 5, thought processes, I can go about having, a stronger conversation with somebody on my team or somebody that I don't even know for, for heaven's sakes. So thanks for joining us today. And we hope you guys are safe out there. And, please, let's take care of each other.
Yeah.